Hello again. Welcome back to Eclipse and Java for Total Beginners. In this lesson, we're going to continue working on our methods in the MyLibrary class. In the last lesson, we wrote the test method for the getBooksForPerson method. So now we're ready to write the actual method. So here we've picked up where we left off in the last lesson. We've got the MyLibrary class open for editing, and we're going to start working on completing the getBooksForPerson method that was auto-generated by the quick fix. So the first thing we're going to do is delete the auto-generated code. We're going to create a little more space. And then the first line is we're going to create a new array list of type book called result. And this is just going to hold the result of this method because we're returning an array list book. Now the next line is a for loop. We're going to type the word for and then hit Control Space and go down and select for each. And we'll explain what this loop does as we go. So we'll type for book and we'll call our local variable a book. And then after the colon we have the list we're going to iterate through, in this case this.getBooks. So the way to read this is for each book, a book, in the list this.getBooks. And then for each one of those, we're going to execute the block of code between the curly braces. Now if, and then we're going to do two parentheses because it's going to be two conditions, a book.getPerson is not equal to null, and not equals exclamation point equal, and then and, which is a double ampersand, and then we're going to do another set of parentheses. A book dot get person dot get name dot equals, and then inside the parentheses p1 dot get name. Then we'll move this down so you can see it. So if both of these things are true, we're going to execute the code inside the curly braces, which is just result.add a book. Just add a book to the result. Then we're going to carefully move outside the for loop and return our result variable. So move this up to make it easier to see, and then we'll save. In this method, we're using our first for loop. It basically works as follows. For each book, a book, and a book is the local variable, in the list returned by the this.getBooks method, so that returns an array list of books. So for each book in the list, then basically do this block of code between the opening and closing curly brace, which in our case is just execute this if statement. Another way of saying this is we're going to start by taking the first book off this list and putting it in our local variable a book, and then we're going to do the statement block. Then we're going to see if there's another book on the list. If so, we'll repeat the process and we'll continue repeating this statement block for each book in the list until there are no more books in the list. This is called a for each loop, and it's a very convenient way of processing each element inside a list. Next, notice that this if statement has two parts to it connected by this and sign. So it's got two different conditions that must be true in order for this statement block to be executed. The first condition is that there must be a person in the person field of the book, so it can't be null, it's not equal to null. And the second condition is that the name of the person, so the book get person get name method, equals the name of person P1. Now it's important to notice how we're checking whether the names are equal. We're using the dot equals method of the string get name. Now why are we using the dot equals method instead of the double equal sign that we've seen in an earlier if statement? The answer is that strings in Java, if you recall, are objects. They're not primitive types like int, boolean, double, and so forth. So as a general rule in Java, whenever we want to compare objects to see if they're equal, we use the objects .equals method. We don't use the double equal sign. So for now, just remember that when you want to compare two strings to see if they're equal, use the .equals method of the string. Don't use the double equal sign. Now finally, we need to be very careful about where we put this return statement. Remember, this curly brace here is the closing curly brace for the for loop, and we don't want to do the return statement inside the for loop. We only want to do one return statement when the for loop is completed. So we need to put it after the closing curly brace of the for loop, and of course before the closing curly brace of the getBooksForPerson method. So we put it right here. Next, let's run our test and see what happens. So we'll go back over to the MyLibrary test, run as JUnitTest, and we can see that the test checkout failed, which is what we expect since we haven't finished that method yet, but our test getBooksForPerson method succeeds. Now let's look at the getBooksForPerson method one more time, specifically at the if statement. The first part of this if statement is to make sure that the getPerson is not equal to null. In other words, to make sure that there is a person object in the person field of our book. Now, why did we need this test? The best way to answer this is to go ahead and change this if statement and remove this test, and then try to run the method again. So we'll comment this if statement out by using the control slash, and then we'll put in a new if statement, which is just the second part of this test. So we'll select the second part of the if statement, being careful about the parentheses, copy and paste, get rid of the comment, and then we'll save, go back to MyLibrary test, and run the test again. Not only did the test fail, but we got a runtime error. And if we look, we can see it's in the form of a null pointer exception. Now, the null pointer exception is a common Java error you get if you're trying to run a method or otherwise do something with a null object. If an object is null, we can't execute any of its methods. If we try to, we get this error. We can avoid this error if we test for the null value before trying to execute the getName method. Now let's go back and fix the getBooksForPerson method. Now before we do, let's see exactly where the null pointer exception came from. We are looping through all of the books in the MyLibrary object. The first book that is not checked out to someone will have a null person field, so the getPerson method will return a null value. Without the test to see if the getPerson is null, we're trying to execute the getName method on a null object reference, hence the null pointer exception. Next, let's fix this up. We'll delete the if statement we added, then we'll highlight these, hit control slash to uncomment. We'll save and go back to MyLibrary test. We'll rerun the test. And this time the test getBooksForPerson method succeeds. Now that we have a working getBooksForPerson method, we can finish our checkout method. Minimize this. Let's go to the Package Explorer. Put up the MyLibrary. And we can go right to the checkout method by double-clicking. Now the first line we're going to add is int booksout equals this getBooksForPerson P1 dot size. This line sets the local variable books out to the number of books that person P1 has out. And the way we're doing that is by using our new getBooksForPerson, which returns a list of the books that person P1 has out, and using the size method on that list to get the count. Now we're going to need to add a second test inside our if statement. To make the code more readable, we'll surround the entire if test with an outer set of parentheses and then put the second if test inside its own parentheses. Next we do our AND statement, the double ampersand, and then we hit the left paren, and notice Eclipse puts in the right paren for us, which makes life a lot easier. It helps us keep our parentheses matched up. Now we type the second part of our test, which is just books out less than P1 get maximum books. And we save and make sure we compile cleanly. So to quickly review, in this line we're calculating how many books the person already has out, and then here we're adding the test to make sure that the books out is less than what this person is allowed. So now let's go back and rerun our test, and everything works. Next, let's add the My Library test to our test suite. So we'll go to the Package Explorer, pull up the All Tests, Test Suite, and we'll just copy line of code here, paste it in, and change the person test to My Library test. Save it, and then if we go run as JUnit test, now we've run our test suite and all of our tests pass. In this lesson, we've created the getBooksForPerson method and used that method to finish the checkout method. In the next lesson, we'll finish up the other methods in the My Library class. This is the end of Lesson 14. I'm Mark Dexter saying so long for now.